Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Scott Jorgens from Vena Solutions and GP Support North. Today we're going to be talking about moving from annual budgeting to quarterly budgeting with Vena. Vena's been a great partner of ours, and we have a number of clients on Dynamics GP using Vena for their budgeting and corporate performance management, scenario planning, forecasting. Vena's a awesome tool set. It's got a really slick Excel front end and powerful cloud back end for all the tracking, attaching extra reports and calculations, automating the workflow, and a variety of other aspects that Marta and Ravi will get into. So Marta, why don't I hand it over to you and you can continue on with the introductions.
Absolutely. No, thanks so much for that, Scott. And to the group here, great to meet everybody virtually, which is the world that we live in right now. As Scott mentioned, my name is Marta, and I'll be your host here this afternoon. I'm one of the senior regional managers here at Vena. I've been with the organization for almost 6 years now, which seems like a really long time, given that we're in a fast-growing technology space. And I've been working really closely with Endeavor and many of our Dynamics clients, and again, really excited to be speaking with everyone here today. I think it goes without saying that we've been through a lot in 2020 and 2021. We've accomplished so much and had an unforeseen run throughout the past year and a half. It goes unspoken that COVID has completely changed the way that businesses are run as a result of working in a remote environment and having just so many restrictions. We've seen a significant change in the digital transformation in that it has progressed almost 5 to 10 years in the span of the last 12 months. We've seen things like supply chain shortages globally, the impact of lumber prices, or even beer shortages in the EU. And one significant sort of impact here is just the employee retention rates have dropped a lot for a lot of organizations there, which is very much driven by the desire to work from home as we have the return to office mandate starting, and more people are kind of thinking about, what do I want to do with my life? And these factors, crossed with the uncertainty still remaining ahead, will surely lead to more changes in how businesses are run. So really understanding where organizations are headed, maybe what bumps may lay ahead, and how to get around them has never been more critical. As a result, now more than ever, finance is expected to be a key figure at the decision-making table, really heading up strategy and outlining the way forward, rather than being more of a back office support function. And this can be really challenging for companies and organizations who aren't really prepared yet to pivot their finance team into this capacity. Companies who have relied on perhaps, on-premise or antiquated systems with disconnected spreadsheets were particularly caught a bit off guard at the start of COVID, as they were under immense pressure to provide these additional insights to help organizations strive and thrive throughout sort of unprecedented times. And within FP&A, your main focus is really planning for the future. So tools and technologies like Vena has helped organizations to maintain that visibility into recent performance, but while also better projecting future needs, allowing you to remain more agile to new trends and requirements while continuing to move forward and continuing to move the planning horizon forward. As a result, finance transformation is the way forward, and this has absolutely been evidenced in just the dramatic increase that we saw for FP&A tools and their availability in the market, the funding for these different types of technologies, and mainly by the adoption of these tools by companies as well. And this really came to be due to the trend among FP&A teams, especially in the last several years, where we have turned planning from a process into more of a habit. And to do this, a lot of companies have, a couple ideas. Idea A here is, because the world is changing dramatically every few months, new conditions can pop up at nearly any moment, budgeting and reforecasting more frequently, such as every quarter, can keep you on track and keep budgets much more relevant. Idea B here is, because there can be so much variance within a company, such as fluctuation in commodity prices, assumptions of employee retention, and just internal negotiations over budgeted dollars within departments, the way around this is to make several iterations of those budgets, test out those different scenarios, maybe apply different sensitivity analysis, and really decide upon the one that provides the best, most accurate prediction and most possible outcome. Adopting one of these strategies tends to help organizations have fewer quote-unquote surprises, offering them greater control, and more importantly, the opportunity to really allow you to be more proactive versus reactive. And I'm sure for the group here, ideally, if you could have it your way, you'd want to be able to do both, have more frequent budgeting and forecasting cadences, but also to be able to plan across multiple scenarios. Companies who are looking to adopt these ideas and this new way forward actually have a couple options here. The first option here is to stay with your current system setup, which for a lot of the individuals on today's webinar here is most likely your Microsoft ERP in conjunction with manual Excel spreadsheets. We're definitely not going to lie, this might be a little bit more of a challenging option, but absolutely doable for perhaps companies that are a little bit more nimble, maybe smaller, or who have less complex processes. The general pros of this approach is that you don't need to make any additional dollar investment into new technologies. And with this team, your team won't have to learn new software or how a new system works because it'll be the status quo. You might even get the opportunity to sharpen some of those processes as you go through multiple iterations and continue to perfect it. But it does ultimately require additional effort and time from the finance department. There is a heavier burden on your group as you'll be spending more time not just budgeting more regularly, but consolidating all of that information, copying, pasting data between spreadsheets to test out different scenarios. And it does require a little bit more disciplined communication and working with department heads as you demand more budgets and more forecasts much more often. Effectively, this process does kind of have to go almost perfectly to be able to pull this off well. And we definitely know as humans we aren't perfect. So if your company isn't as disciplined or as communicative already, or if it's a much larger organization, pulling this off might be a little bit of a challenge. So the process can otherwise be a little bit too much of a large of an undertaking, could take too long, be too error prone for companies who are just running in their current traditional Excel-based manual methods. Alternatively, option 2 has companies moving into a much more collaborative budgeting system. And unbiasedly, there's definitely a lot of benefits to this approach here. For example, hundreds of hours of medial tasks can be completely eliminated by automating the consolidation of data as it's coming from both systems and people. Adding in a workflow engine can really help to systematize the different steps, reviews, approvals, communications, all those notifications, versus having to set up reminders manually or having to remember to send out emails to people to chase them down for those details. And since the data is actually stored in a centralized location, that information suddenly becomes much more up-to-date, accurate, auditable, and available in real time. So as department heads submit all of their asks to you as a finance team, internally negotiating with these department heads over remaining budgets becomes a little bit more palatable as you can test out the different scenarios without having to recreate new spreadsheets and really kind of amplify your headache. The system really guides you through the budgeting process, keeping all communications and updates streamlined and completely relevant within Vena. However, with adoption of any new technology, there's definitely some things to consider, and I'm sure the group here has food for thought on that. But moving to a new system does require some investment upfront in the way of additional time, potentially monetary. There's a period that it takes to implement, and there could potentially be some minor learning curves for some of those end users. That being said, though, this definitely isn't just unique to a new budgeting system, as it can apply to any company looking to use software to solve a problem. And change management isn't always the easiest thing for us humans, so much of that success does also depend on company culture. Here at Endeavor and at Vena, we're big believers in using technology to solve problems, and I think for the most part the group on this webinar here as well. So with that, let's chat about what it would look like if you were to choose option 2 and move into a budgeting system. When it does come to adopting more frequent budgeting and forecasting processes with technology, there's a few things to keep in mind to make sure that you can become the most successful. First off, you always want to keep your business-wide objectives top of mind. Your budgeting process will definitely have to reflect these, so that way you're always planning and forecasting in the right direction. Another area to think about is maybe what time frame you want your business to move to this new process with these tools. Will it be a quarterly budget and a quarterly reforecast, or will you do that perhaps on a monthly basis and even potentially move towards a rolling forecast? Also, Connected Planning System gives you the ability to get much more granular on your data. Will you want your budget to be down at the SKU level, maybe the individual employee level? And also, too, will it be top-down or bottom-up, or perhaps even a combination of both? So you want to start to think about how to incorporate the best data. Would there be additional data sets you want to pull in and work with, or additional individuals you'd like to include as part of that process? And of course, lastly, with anything new and a new initiative and a new process, it's always imperative to measure along the way. As an example, when you close out a period, you want to compare your reforecast and your quarterly budgets to what really happened once the information has become actualized. And by measuring along the way, you can make sure to see if your recent budgets or your forecasts that you had built are actually in line with reality. Are you budgeting accurately? And if so, awesome. And if not, where can you make some further tweaks down the line here in the next round? And when you want to move into that new reality and adopt a quarterly budgeting process, there's some fantastic options available out there. And Endeavor has chosen actually to partner with Vena because of really our underlying technology and our unique approach, which I know Scott had actually touched upon at the very beginning of sort of today's webinar. Here's a couple of reasons why considering Vena as a change agent is an option. So first, our database is now connected to all of your underlying systems, such as your ERPs, and already has the most up-to-date information. Those automated workflows and reminders make sure that everyone stays on track in completing the budgeting and the forecasting on time. If someone's slowing down the bus, you can easily identify those bottlenecks and even take some proactive actions. The system is also very flexible to handle those natural negotiations that happen inside of a company and kind of test out those different asks from department leaders across multiple scenarios. You can apply various what-if budgets, various what-if forecasts, whether or not you want to start a new product line or invest in a new marketing campaign or even acquire a new manufacturing plant. And you have Vena to automate all of those calculations and see how it could potentially impact your bottom line. And as mentioned in one of the previous slides here too, the entire cut, copy, paste routine that the teams go through within disconnected spreadsheet absolutely becomes a thing of the past. And again, our clients have saved hundreds of hours in just a month with this alone. With Vena, communication through the organization has also never been easier. Trends around organizational goals can easily be tracked for the first time. You can get that executive buy-in because they're able to see the total company health at a high level, which is where they mostly spend their focus on. Organizations can now run both top-down and bottom-up budgets and forecasts and have Vena do all the heavy lifting and calculate where you can meet in the middle. New financial models lets you also connect data and build a mural of your organization in one place where predictive analytics now suddenly become a possibility. And these new reports and dashboards showing all these various organizational KPIs, comparing different scenarios, which have historically been very difficult to track, are now available in real time. And last but not least, something that we absolutely pride ourselves on here is that we actually have 100% Microsoft Excel front end, which provides a very familiar environment to both finance as well as end users. It's less scary than a brand new technology where it might have a proprietary grid, and it makes the learning curve much more minimal for the end users, ultimately leading to higher adoption, getting those individuals to use the tool as they collaborate and really take full advantage of all the benefits of this budgeting system here. So with that, why don't we take a quick look on Vena in action, and I will pass things over here to Robbie to walk us through a high-level overview of the platform.
Thanks for that, Marta. I'm going to take some time here to show the actual Vena application itself, and I'm going to be showing it from two different perspectives. The first one from a business user's perspective, so someone who's actually going in, being a budget owner, and actually completing tasks within that budget. And then we'll also flip the script a little bit and show it from a power user's perspective, someone who's actually owning Vena, or an administrator side of things. So as you can see here, I'm going to log into Vena. I'm logging in through the browser because Vena is a cloud-based application. And so as I log in here, I'm going to take the role, again, of someone of a business user. Let's assume my name is Frank Jones, and I'm a budget owner within our New York department or New York entity. And so what you'll see here is what we have is a list of individualized tasks in order of priority. Here we have a list of individualized tasks here with sort of the overdue tasks at the top, as well as the order of priority of tasks. And as I was speaking to earlier, we can filter down this list by those inputs, reviews, and reports here. And so just to speak to some of the inputs here, if I were to click on a task such as expense planning, I now have this little side pane here that allows me to give me some information about that task. So that includes who am I collaborating with on this task. So there could be multiple owners, it could be some people who are supporting me in the task, as well as anyone who wants to just view the task, any of the work that's being done as it's being kind of gone through there. Then I've got the actual forms, the actual work that I'm going to complete, and you'll notice here that we do have some Excel templates to work on. As Marta alluded to earlier, Vena uses Excel as our front end or sort of window or lens into the underlying database. And so this is what we're going to use to actually complete the budget. And then lastly, we have our due date at the top, which we saw earlier, due in 14 days, along with any instructions or supporting documents that may be left for me as a budget owner to complete this task. And that can vary from Microsoft Word documents, PDFs, and videos and things of that nature. So I'm going to check out my operating expense template here. And you should be able to see an Excel template that's opening up. As I mentioned, we're using Excel. You'll notice that there's actually no data yet populated, and the reason for that is just exactly what I mentioned earlier. We're not using Excel to store the data. We're using it as a window into the underlying kind of database behind the scenes. What I do have here, however, is a selection box that's allowing me to choose what it is that I want to work on for this particular task. You'll notice I've already been pre-selected New York, and that's intentional in that, for security purposes, we're able to segregate who's working on what area of the budget. And so because I am the New York sales director, the New York director, I'm able to see specifically only New York. However, I do have the option to select from a list of different departments in here. And so today I'm going to choose my sales department for planning purposes. I'm also going to select my year 2022. I also have the option to select a variety of scenarios. And just alluding back to Marta's point earlier around scenario modeling, whereas right now I could be working on my base annual budget, I could be working on a quarterly forecast, I also have the option to select what-if scenarios, a high plan, a low plan, a variety of different ways of planning. And the way we would typically see that is maybe you want to start with a base budget, take that as a copy, and then start to change some of your assumptions. Maybe we hire 10 more people, or maybe we change some of our underlying revenue assumptions. And from there, we have this what-if plan that we can then compare against our base sort of approved budget. For today's example, we're just going to choose the budget as a simple kind of example. And as I click OK, I'm going to load in the information according to my selections here. And so what we have is a bottom-up sort of planning template here. You'll notice on the rows here, we have a list of all of our GL accounts or all of our accounts coming out of Dynamics with respect to operating expense, that line item. And then on the columns, we have our 12 months of budget. I also have the ability to drill in on my prior year as well, so I'm able to see actuals from January all the way through to October, with the assumption that we're right now planning in the fall. We're in November. We've got the forecast for the remaining year, but we've also got our actuals previously for the earlier year here. And just to speak to this, we'd be able to bring in that data directly from Dynamics. We have the ability to load that data in on a frequency of your choosing. Typically, our customers have it refresh on a nightly basis, so that every day you come into Vena, you have the latest and greatest with respect to your actuals data. So we'll come back to that in a sec, but typically we use color coding here just to ensure that we know where we're putting in information. So these blue cells being signified as inputs, so I can actually come in and input information here. And then these white cells being more sort of locked cells for the purposes of formulas and other logic that's being done behind the scenes here. So simply, I can just come in and start to input information as I normally would in Excel. And I can use all of the functionality that you know and love in Excel, drag to copy. I can do a Control-C, Control-V. I can even use formulas as well. So I can do something as simple as that number times 2. And as I'm ready to kind of save that information, I come in and write that back to the database. And so now we're saving that and kind of committing those changes to the database. And what's happened here is we've actually dynamically consolidated that information back up to the database. And so if I was an executive that wanted to see a report of all my entities, all my departments, I would now see that this total change has been updated and included in that value. So we've dynamically consolidated that information back to the database. And just to show you that a little bit, if I were to come in here and actually delete this information without saving it and just refresh, the expectation here is that we're bringing that information back because it is from that database. So that's one way to plan, is just to directly input information at the GL level. However, there may be situations where you want to give a little bit more detail on how your plan is going to kind of build up. So what I may want to do here is insert a couple lines. If I'm planning on consulting, for example, I may want to have vendor level planning. So I may want to add a couple vendors in here. It could also be by project as well. The choice is yours. I have an option to input a description. And as I start to input information in here, I'm just going to add some numbers. I'm going to drag to copy. And you'll notice that we've already aggregated that information back up to the GL level, which is where, of course, your budget owners, budget directors may want to actually have. But that lower level detail, which actually has the thought process and the buildup of that number, we're still retaining both that information. And so if I, again, were to save this information back to the database, we're not only saving the GL information that's going to flow into my budgeted P&L, we're also saving the lower level details so we can actually explain that budget. Okay. I alluded to this a little earlier. We're going to take a look into the prior year here. As we go into the prior year, we notice, again, bringing in that dynamics information. However, as a budget owner, again, in the New York department, I may want to understand, what it is that I actually spent in the previous year. And so this $8,600 amount, I want to understand specifically what makes up that number. And so because we brought in transaction detail from the ERP system, which is Dynamics, I can then use Vena's drill to transactions functionality, and it's going to pull in that transaction level detail into another tab for me. And I can just come in easily and just rename this, call it actuals. And now you'll see here we have this nice little table of all the transactions that make up that total. So I got my amount column in here, the 8,600. Think about all the different details I now have available to me. I have vendor level detail, I have invoice level detail, I have quantities if I need to. So that, any type of detail that you want to bring in from that ERP system, we can put that through in the transaction level detail here. And of course, because it's in a table format, I can do pivoting, I can do any type of additional work I need to from an analysis perspective. Okay. So as we come back to our planning, we've done two types of planning now. We've done inputs, we've done line items. But let's say I want to simplify my planning process a little bit and give my users the ability to just perform calculations. And so this is where we have what's called driver-based planning. And so as we come into some of these items in here, you'll notice that we, as I mentioned earlier, we locked down some of those cells. And the reason for that is at the bottom here, we actually have a couple of drivers and KPIs that we've brought in from a variety of different sources. Some of them are coming from other budget templates, things like revenue and gross margin, but then we have these other KPIs, things like headcount, employee survey scores, units sold, customer satisfaction. All of these type of information could also be counted as drivers to perform our expense planning. And these can, again, be brought in from different source systems or from other templates that we have within Vena. And so we're going to use that information below to actually perform our expense planning. As an example, computer supplies. Maybe we plan computer supplies depending on how many people we actually have. And so what we're saying here is we're going to plan to spend $25,000 for the year, and you'll see that total is just reflected here. But the way that we're spreading that month over month is based on that fluctuation of headcount. And so you'll see in earlier months we're spending a lot less because our headcount is lower, but as we ramp up in the year, we're getting to a larger headcount and of course allocating more of that spend to those months. And again, if I were to change this number to 26,000, for example, add an extra 1,000, it's going to allocate that proportionately for the year, and we're still sitting at the 26,000 there. Okay, and then another way I may want to consider planning, and again, from an Excel perspective, it's really flexible to have multiple tabs and be able to do that additional work. So as a budget owner, I might have a side model that I want to work on. We call it a scratch pad. So as simply as adding an additional tab and coming in and doing that work is certainly possible here with Excel. And just for streamlined purposes, I've done that already. I've created this little scratch pad in here. What I may have done is copy and pasted some of those transaction level details into a nice little table here, done some additional work, expected price times quantity, and I finally got into a number that I'm happy with. And so just like you normally would in Excel, I can come in here and I can actually do an equal sign or that scratch pad to my number. And now what we're doing is the same way that we did with the line items, we're actually retaining the thought process of that budget owner. Whereas in the classic sense, I might have done this on a physical scratch pad or maybe in an offline Excel spreadsheet. We're now keeping that all within one application. And so what you'll see downstream, and I see that you got that scratch pad there. Yeah, so you may have that on a physical scratch pad. That thought process and that buildup gets lost in translation. But within Vena, we're keeping that in one place. So when we reference the budget downstream, we're able to come back and see that thought process. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to save that information again back to the database. And so now I can, again, retain that scratch pad for future purposes. The last thing I'll show in this template is I may want to come back and audit my details. And you notice I saved a couple times as we were in the template in here, as well as downstream. I may want to, maybe I made a change 2 days ago and I realized that I need to go back to that change and understand exactly what that looked like. What I can do is go into my audit trail, and you'll see here I have a trail of every time that I've saved the information, or anyone in that, for that matter. You'll see who saved it, in our case Frank Jones, when did they save it, and what was the type of save that they performed. And you'll see here just in the few minutes that we've had, I've saved it a couple of times, so I can come in here and actually view that. But what's even better than that is maybe I want to select 2 different instances of my save and do a compare. And so now Vena is going to load in those workbooks, both of those workbooks, and compute the differences. And so what I'm going to see here now is my new workbook, which is the current workbook, but now Vena is highlighting specific areas that we changed from one version to another. So if I highlight over this, I can see that we changed that value from 45,000 to 20,500, and that was related to a formula, which was that scratch pad below. And so I still retain the scratch pad that I saw earlier. I can also see that some of these formulas have changed because these are new values, as well as the driver base as well, again, as a result of a formula change. So we're tracking versions along the way, and we're being able to come back and compare those versions for any changes that were made along the budgeting process. And so if I close out of that, I also have my old version as well. So if I want to compare my old version, I still have that. And then we'll come back to our live version here as well. So now we've done a bit of planning in here. We're kind of comfortable with what we've done. We're going to close out of here, and we've done our last save, and we're going to check that file back into Vena. And so as we get back into the application here, I've completed my task, and I can then now hit submit. And so now that I've hit submit, it's now in the in review status. So my reviewer is now going to get a notification letting them know that I've completed my task, and it's their turn to come in and review my work. I still have access to view those reports, but they're only on a view-only basis because now my changes are locked in and now in my reviewer's hands. So that was Vena from a business user's perspective. We're going to change the script a little bit here. I'm going to actually log in specifically as a sort of budget owner, or rather a power user. So I'm just going to backtrack here a little bit. You'll notice as I log in, I have a couple more roles in here, the manager role being that main power user's role. And as I come in, I can see I have a variety of different processes that are available to me. And when you think about processes within Vena, it's any repeatable, collaborative, and data-driven process. So that can include an annual budget. That can include a quarterly reforecast. It could also be a month-end close process or an incentive compensation management process. Again, any process, data-driven, collaborative, and repeatable. And so I can come in here, I can select my annual budget, for example, and you'll notice I have a 2022 annual budget that I have currently in play, but I've also archived my previous year's budget for that audit trail purchase that we saw earlier. Once I click into that, I actually get taken to what's called our workflow designer. And so with any process, you have a design, sort of a whiteboard here where we have a start point, we have an end point, and then in between is the order of operations or sort of steps taken in order to complete that process. Again, this is a repeatable process. In our case, it's annual. It could also be a quarterly process, as Marta mentioned. From a quarterly perspective, we could be repeating this process on a more frequent basis. And so within this workflow here, we have a couple of different things. We have tasks in here where we can complete those. We have review steps that we saw earlier with the submission of that task. We've got reporting packages that we have in these little blue cells, as well as any specific sub-workflows or sub-activities as part of the sort of budget process. I'll just take a pause there and go over to our files library just to explain to you where did those Excel templates that we saw earlier, where they come from. If I click into my file structure, into my input templates, you'll see here that I have my operating expense Excel template. I also have templates for my CapEx, my workforce planning. What I want to illustrate here to you is that with Vena, we're not, in the classic sense of, in the offline Excel world, you may have 10 or 20 different templates for all of your departments and all of your entities, and you're trying to distribute those and trying to consolidate them into one place. We've templatized Excel, and so you saw earlier as I got into the template, I was able to select from a choose box all of my different departments. We're not creating different templates, we're using one template and the ability to just slice and dice the information accordingly. And so the way that these templates get designed is it could be a pre-configured solution that we saw earlier, which is one of Vena's templates, built with best practices, optimized for the application. Or we can also create and add your own templates in here as well. So you might have a model that you already love in Excel. We then bring that into Vena and we can use your own template. So just wanted to show you that as a prerequisite because what I want to illustrate now is the ability to not only design the workflow from a visual perspective, but also execute your workflow the way that we saw earlier. And so if I click into, for example, my targets and drivers task, I can start to come in here and assign users. So I can choose from a list of all of my users that are within Vena. I can then attach those same forms that we saw earlier in the files library. So some of them could be driver templates, some of them could be the operating expense templates, and I can of course also assign a due date. So we've got the who, the what, the when. With respect to due dates, we can simply choose from the calendar. But what's even better than that, as I mentioned, this is a repeatable process. What we can do is create what's called a smart date, which allows us to create that 10 work days after the process begins. And we can of course add that repeatability, that cadence, so that every time we roll over this process, again, annually, quarterly, daily, weekly, depending on your frequency, we can create that cadence around due dates here. And then the last thing I'll show is with respect to the activities here, we've got the non-labor expense stuff. As I went in here, we saw expense planning for New York. We've actually segregated sub-workflows based on my regions or based on my entities. This is why I have a New York, my Frank Jones sort of workflow here was around expense planning, but I may have, sort of staff that are in different regions, Montreal, Los Angeles, London. I can also create sub-workflows for those individuals as well. Once we've designed the workflow and we're happy with it, we hit play, we then execute it to everybody that's in the workflow. We all get a notification letting us know that the process has begun and we have tasks to come in to complete. And then as a super user, as that budget sort of overall kind of FP&A director role here, I then want to go into what's called a status tracker and be able to actually track the status as it's going through in play. And so from here, I have this nice dashboard or control panel that's going to give us a full viewpoint of that data, of that sort of process as it's in play. All my tasks that I just created in here, I have them in a nice list format. I've got all the information about those tasks, who owns it, what is the status, if there's a review attached to it, what's the review status, and the due date again. I can then filter down this list by this nice donut chart here by what's under review. So I could see that expense planning task that Frank just submitted is now under review, again, against things that are started versus work in progress versus approved. And then of course from a calendar perspective, we're tracking our full budget process over time through this nice calendar here. Okay, so again, this is our sort of power user viewpoint, and this is where we're able to manage and create processes overall. Just to cap off today's demo, what we're going to do is we're going to jump right back into Frank's world. We're going to go back to sort of our contributor viewpoint, and now we're going to take a look at some reporting and analysis as well. And so if I go over to my reports here, I could see that Frank has a nice little financial and operational reporting package. So we've got things from financial statements to P&L variance statements. What I'm going to look at today is an executive dashboard. So the ability to look at data in a sort of a more storytelling format and being able to analyze that data through a variety of different means. We're going to see that again we have a choose box to select our data. You'll notice this time I have the option to choose for my entities, whereas before I didn't, and that was because of security reasons. In this case, I'm able to choose all of my entities, and so you can see here I have a hierarchy structure of all the different entities that I have in my organization. And I've actually created that hierarchy by region here, so I've got my US and Canada regions, in things like Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles, European as well. But then I may also want to take those same bottom level entities, as we call them, and kind of reorganize them by function. So now I'm going to look at, instead of regionally, I'm looking at it by function. So manufacturing centers versus sales and distribution centers. I may also want to reorganize it by currency. Some of these entities are, in local USD versus Canadian dollar versus British pounds. So there's different ways that I can roll up my entities. So today I'm going to look at all. I'm going to look at the consolidated viewpoint. And again, I'm going to choose my departments, in this case, all departments. And so as we click on OK, just as before, we're loading in the data according to our selections. What we have here is an executive summary, which is effectively a 360-degree view of the business. And the reason why I say that is because we have a couple of different viewpoints of our business here. We've got the financial health of our business, where we're looking at metrics like gross margin and net income. And we're, of course, seeing that nice trend here from a visual perspective from our different scenarios, budget versus forecast versus actual. From an operational perspective, and this can vary, of course, by the industry that you're in, but things like operating expenses and salaries and general operating expenses. Again, another trend that we're seeing as well. Then we get into some other types of details around our people, our employees, our people health, things like headcount and FTE. And then, of course, from a customer perspective, again, varying on the industry that you're in, you may be looking at details like units sold, pipeline opportunities, customer satisfaction. So what I want to illustrate here is we're organically bringing together different sources of data, whether that's within Vena or otherwise, and we're being able to see the business from a 360-degree viewpoint. I can then click into one of these areas and kind of dive into that as well. And so now we have a more integrated viewpoint of our financial health, and I can actually use this as a pivot here in terms of being able to compare my actual versus my budget, for example, or maybe my forecast versus actual. And now I have this kind of more interactive viewpoint of a dashboard, as opposed to just a static report that I just look at and kind of assume what I need to assume. I can actually interact with that dashboard here as well. And then lastly, what I want to do is also just look at my P&L overall and just perform some variance analysis. So we saw some reports earlier on the variance analysis. This is an example of one of those reports. On the rows here, I've got my full P&L all the way down to my net income, or in this case, EBIT, as well as some non-kind of P&L metrics like headcount as well. And you'll notice on the columns here, I'm able to compare a variety of different time periods. So in this case, I'm comparing my monthly actuals for August versus my budget for August, and this is for one singular month. I'm also able to see the same time period and scenario for year to date, as well as the full year as well. And what I can do is it's actually interactive. Again, just like the other dashboards, I can come in and choose from either, again, my budget or some of those what-if scenarios that we may have done earlier. I can also choose my year. In our case, let's look at 2022. And I can also change the month as well. So I can come down to maybe January, for example, and let's come in and we hit refresh. As we hit refresh there, you'll notice it's going to load in the data according to those selections. So now the data has actually changed. Again, it's an interactive dashboard that you can use to work with whatever purpose you need. So I'm comparing my variances, but what I may want to do as well is come into an item like, for example, my advertising, I can still have the ability to drill into that information. So in this case, I'm going to use a drill down functionality. And as I come in here, I now have a list format, just as we saw earlier with the transaction detail for actuals. I now have a combination of all the entities, all the departments. In your case, you may have other ways of slicing your information, but essentially we're seeing all that, all of our advertising costs for every entity in every department. And because this is in a data format, I can of course come in here and do pivoting. I can do some charting. I can use Excel functionality that you know and love in terms of inserting different charts. There's also a functionality called the ideas, which is with our Office 365 users, where I can come in and actually analyze that information using this ideas function. And so I might want to come in here and say, Microsoft's going to come in and actually analyze that information for me and provide me with some quick insights on that data point. Again, I mentioned you can filter this down. So maybe, again, we want to take a look at New York as we saw earlier. And we can see specifically that, there's some specific items in here. I may want to click into one of these and say, I want to know a little bit more about this value. So again, going back into Vena, doing that drill functionality, but this time we want to use the drill saves. And so this is where I'm able to get a save history of that value that we saw earlier. So we could see that it started off earlier as blank, then it got changed to 45,000, and then now it's at 20,500. What I can do is I can hit view, and as I open up that template, I think you can maybe see where this is going. We're actually coming back full circle to where we started. We're opening up the template as it was when we last saved it. So that 20,500 that we saw from our scratchpad is available here. I can actually go back to that scratchpad, still have that viewpoint of it, and then of course see the template as it is in that moment. So again,
pending security, that could even be a different user?
Sorry, say that again?
That's even a different user? Like a finance person's opening up Frank's template?
Correct. So if I'm a director in this case and I want to dive into Frank's details, I have the ability to do that as well. Yeah, absolutely. And so again, now coming full circle. And so that's kind of, mainly what I wanted to show today from a demo perspective is being able to say, from a business user's perspective and then also from a director or from a power user's perspective. I'm not sure if there's any questions in the chat, but if not, I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it back over to you, Marta.
Ravi, again, thanks so much for that demo. That was great. That was a little bit of a crash course for the team that we've got on this webinar here. But hopefully everyone can see that because of sort of the underlying technology, the different features, functionalities, and most importantly, kind of the approach and the fact that we use that Excel front end. The team can see here that Vena has truly become not only a trusted partner of Endeavor's, but also a trusted platform for so many organizations. What we have here on the screen is just a small subset of some of our Dynamics clients who are using Vena as they move towards that more automated budgeting and forecasting process, moving towards a quarterly budget and whatnot. And I wanted to actually call out a couple clients here specifically for the group, given that I feel, maybe some of their pains, challenges could be felt by the team over here. So first and foremost, we've got Saddle Creek, a large logistics company who ran their entire budgets in Dynamics and Excel, and they very much struggled to find that granular detail because their spreadsheets just wouldn't allow it. So they had no simple way of seeing the performance view for each individual cost center. That traditional process took much longer than necessary, and their budgets were somewhat obsolete by the time they had completed them. Whereas with Vena, they were able to complete their budget 4 weeks faster than previously, and their executive teams became much better business partners to each cost center and could offer real-time feedback on how to improve profitability, especially during the ever-changing environment like we had experienced in the last year and a half. Inac Automotive is another large global manufacturing firm here where they had 30 department heads, 6 plants grouped across 80 spreadsheets that were just riddled with errors, broken links, and keeping track of that process was a struggle where the Inac team actually had to have 5 full-time staff to help run that. Whereas with Vena, once they rolled out their budgeting process, they were able to shave 6 weeks from that immediately and continue to do that, to do so with each budget cycle, expediting that process quarter over quarter. More importantly, though, I think the mindset of the people in the organization changed too, because no longer were they questioning whether or not the numbers are accurate, because they had full confidence in that data, and they were able to put a lot of their thought into the story behind the numbers that they were reporting on and analyzing here. And lastly here, NAMI, National Association for Mental Illness, is a not-for-profit, which again, running on Dynamics ERP, and their organization was growing extremely quickly, and it became very, very cumbersome for their team to run in their previous Excel environment. The biggest challenges were just keeping track of which data was correct, which was the final version. As they worked through their 70-plus spreadsheets, they had multiple areas of inputs, multiple scenarios based on the grants that they received, and it made the process a big struggle for them to get through that. Ultimately, they historically have been spending 80% of their time consolidating, validating spreadsheets, and only 20% of their time analyzing that information. But with Vena to automate these processes for them, NAMI was really able to flip that 80-20 ratio and increase their time for analysis by almost 4x.
Hey, my turn. Thank you so much, Marta. Thank you so much, Ravi. That was an amazing presentation, and the thought leadership around pulling all the pieces together in a automated fashion, thinking ahead, making sure you're communicating, trusting your data is a great feat in a manual process, and you do need the tools to help solidify and grease the wheels of the machines that are working behind the scenes. For those that are new to Endeavor, we've been around for over 30 years now. Looking at the list, we do have some clients that have been with us for 10 and 15 years and longer. So just as a recap, we still love Dynamics GP. GP Support North is the brand that we're using to support Dynamics GP, and Endeavor is continuing to evolve and grow and supporting Dynamics 365, Business Central, and CRM, and all of the Microsoft Cloud components, including Azure, Office 365, Microsoft 365, and helping all our clients, advisory, recommending best tools, bringing in new ideas and innovation, implementation, and working with our partners for these tools, and ultimately hoping to keep you as customers for life. So thank you very much for those that attended today. One last slide for myself, if you could, Marta. Just in terms of next steps, you can reply to the webinar invite or reach out to Trish, James, and Steve on our team, and they'll be able to help you with next steps. In terms of Vena, next steps are talk to us. We can talk to some of our consultants who are trained and certified with Vena, and also pull in Marta, Ravi, and others on their team to go through requirements gathering, create a customized, deeper demo for you, talk about pricing and investments, and ultimately help you get from point A to point B. And in line with today's webinar, that's moving from an annual to a quarterly budget, and helping you with your scenario planning and forecasting, and ultimately the agility of your organization. So with that said, thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.